globally, plastic pollution is projected to cost $3.3 trillion a year to the global economy. So that kind of breaks down into loss of revenue, for example, the tourism, loss of revenue for local fisheries and aquacultures, loss of revenue for the real estate because the area gets polluted and the value goes down.
Welcome back to the Clean Techies podcast, where we interview climate tech founders and VCs to discuss all things building and investing to solve the biggest challenge of our generation, climate change. Today we are joined by Nicola Rubini from the River Cleaning Project by Conai. You may not know, but 80% of plastics that end up in the ocean are deposited there by rivers. Today we speak with Nicola about how they are trying to fix this problem, given that rivers are conveniently a focused path of water. The technology they have is pretty fascinating, but what's more is the nuances required to navigate the political issues and the difficulties of building these types of businesses. Really interesting challenges that hopefully are valuable to any founders listening. Enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the show. How's it going today?
It's very good. It's quite spring-like here in Italy, so on the contrary to what's been going on in the US, here's not raining very much, so we have a bit of a problem with that. But aside from environment going crazy, everything's pretty good.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of negative things going on with climate change and everything, but we try to work towards the positive solutions for it, right? So anyways, very, very keen to get into today's conversation. Why don't we start with just having you give us a quick kind of story about a bit of a background on yourself and what you're working on today.
All right. Okay. So that's a very interesting start for a story because I'm currently the project manager for the river cleaning technology. And that's quite different actually from my educational background or what I was doing before. In fact, I studied languages as my bachelor, and then got a master's degree in international business and one in marketing. And that was a few years ago. Then I worked in different areas, now from territory promotion to teaching to business coaching for industrial players who were setting up agreements with a Japanese company. I got the chance to live in Japan for 1 year. And when I got back, I was just browsing for work opportunities in the areas and learned about this newborn idea, which is the river cleaning project. Now, I always lived close to nature and rivers in my hometown, so they feel kind of special to me. And naturally, I got curious when I learned about this project, and I was immediately hooked by the idea of doing my part in the world out there. So I have this tendency of getting entangled in things I like and things that interest me, and I really cannot hold back when it comes to this. So funnily enough, the CEO of the company, which holds the river cleaning project, went through something similar when we first knew each other. He had several years of experience in the design and making of thermoplastic material parts for the car sector. And even though the business was successful, he decided to invest his own money in this river cleaning project to, let's say, put his past expertise at the service of the future. So that's where the river cleaning project actually started. Initially it was just an idea on paper, and with the help of his past experience and new ideas from younger people, that's what transformed it very rapidly to a real life applicable idea. There was also COVID, so kind of got stuck in the lab trying to get things working.
Hey there. Quick break to remind any founders or VCs listening, if you are looking for deal flow, seeking to raise funding, looking for partners to help service your needs, or perhaps you're looking for corporate investment partners, feel free to reach out to us through our Slack channel, which can be found in the description. Because we meet a lot of people in this space, we set aside time each week to make introductions to the various people that we encounter. This is something we do free of charge in order to help these incredible companies solving climate change to scale. Looking forward to hearing from you in the Slack channel. Yeah, interesting. Could you tell us more about the principle behind why specifically a river cleaning project? I understand that there's a lot of water pollution in general from bottles and things, but could you tell us maybe some of the data and the reason behind specifically rivers?
Yeah, so plastic pollution is currently ranked second among humanity's worst problems, which is just after climate change. And this should not be surprising, knowing that every year 8 to 13 million tons of plastic, this is just plastic, not all the waste, enter seas and oceans globally. So the global plastic production, which is currently like at its historical maximum, is not projected to decrease anytime soon. And the problem is many areas around the world do not have formal or proper waste management. So this leaves people without options to dispose of their waste, which is landfilled or just thrown away in the environment. And high density population and environmental phenomena like heavy rains, especially in certain parts of the world, do the rest. This is how trash finds its way into the environment and like escapes the human control. So that's how, let's say, pollution gets so big as a problem. Now, there's also the issue of rivers, which is why do they play such a big role in the spreading of this pollution? The thing is, rivers are like veins in a tissue. They connect inland area to marine environments. And according to the scientific literature, it is estimated that it's 1,500 rivers, actually more than that, that carry 85% of the global pollution to the oceans. And this is a game changer in how we should look at rivers and how we should plan to tackle pollution. A few years ago, for example, we had completely different numbers. It was thought that only like the 10 biggest rivers were relevant in carrying the pollution around the world. But now we know that plastic pollution is much more subtle than that and has several entry points into river basins. So, for example, through street side drains, from channelized waterways in the cities. Plus, once this litter enters the river system, the river themselves function as plastic reservoirs. So litter, for example, gets stuck in plants, gets stuck in places, and it may take several time for it to be discharged from their place and finally reach the sea. Currently, the most polluted areas, where the most pollution is produced is Asia, but Europe has several river mouths emitting a few million of plastic items per year into the seas. I'm not talking only about the Mediterranean, but also the North Sea, the Black Sea, and also USA and South America are also key target areas because, of course, they are pretty big areas. So that's how it is.
Yeah, interesting. So in general, just to kind of summarize it, essentially the problem is that because rivers are probably in many cases very close to populations and everything, these are collecting the plastics and the pollutions, and it's just kind of sending it down into the oceans. So if you essentially can cut off that issue and clean up the issue, you can prevent it from going into the ocean, right? It's kind of a convenient way to pick it up, right? Because it's going down one little measurable and manageable channel. Many of those, but tell us about the project. How does it actually work? Walk us through the details.
All right. So the basic idea behind the river cleaning project is to provide solutions that can be applied in most of the rivers worldwide, fitting every or most needs in terms of dimension and in terms of environmental conditions. Um, we target river, as we told you, as we already were telling, because it's cost effective compared to beach or sea cleanups. In fact, there is only a tiny fraction of the marine litter which floats, and interventions at sea, as you know, have a very large scope, involve people, involve ships. It's very hard to mobilize ship, energy consumption, time. So if we compare the effort against the limited results, it turns out it's not a very sustainable model to rely on exclusively. Now, it can be done, of course, but we need to start targeting the roots of plastic pollution in order to meet 2030 and 2050 agendas. With river cleaning, our aim is to enable a technological shift, let's say, in the paradigm, to not only raise our commitment, but to do so with two key concepts in mind, which is simplify and customize.
Hey there. Are you building a climate tech business and looking for very specialized talent? Consider reaching out to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a career change yourself, feel free to reach out to NextWave at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page.
How we do that? Basically, river cleaning barriers do exactly what we expect barriers to do. So they stop floating and semi-submerged macro and mesolitter, and they're, let's say, quite good at doing that. We work with universities to test different size and compositions of litter, and the results showed that overall we have a 95% retention, reaching almost 100% for the most common items like bottles and food packaging. So in that range of dimension and plastic composition. Then what gives river cleaning barriers a competitive edge is actually how they work. So from the pictures, for example, it's very easy to see they're made of these round floaters. They have a hard shell outside and low density material on the inside. So they work like buoys, floating buoys, exactly like that. Now there are several of these placed diagonally to cover the entirety of the river, and each of these modules works separately, but they are connected and are anchored to a structure that keeps them in place. It can be an overhead structure or an underwater structure, for example. That depends on the kind of solution we're devising. Now the top of the modules look like bottle caps or gears, if you want. But the underwater part is actually shaped like a turbine, so it has blades. What they do is the natural water current simply pushes on the blades, and each module spins as a result of this force. Now, by virtue of this spinning movement, since they are placed diagonally to cover the entirety of the river, not only the trash flow gets blocked, so litter gets retained, but it also gets funneled from one to another of these floaters onto a collection cage, which is located on the riverside, on one side of the river. And that's how basically we can avoid having lots of unnecessary work to pick up litter from, for example, from the middle of the river using mechanical arms or by having people go there with boats and nets, which can also be not only a problem but can also be dangerous sometimes in certain environments. You avoid cloggings because you do not have material lingering on the barrier, and also you have a solution basically working 24/7 and energy free, using only the power of the water itself.
One thing I want to know about is I mean, maybe this is too quick to get to this, but would this affect the ability to have ships if it's a bigger river? I don't know how big of a river you tend to put this in, but if it's a large river that tends to have maybe shipping routes, does this affect that?
We actually started from that very point, so to address navigable rivers, where, for example, there's a lot of ships incoming, um, and we thought about that by having different solutions. So, for example, we for small boats, they can simply push aside the modules and they get back to position because they have like connecting wires to an underwater structure. For larger ships, like for example cargo ships, this of course would not work because you would need to place long cables, and that would hinder the ability of these floaters to keep their position. So for that case, we have devised an opening system. So there are like environmental scanning sensors placed at the two sides of the river. They detect an incoming ship, and basically the system is programmed to open up and then close back when the ship has passed. Now that system, which works best for rivers with lots of ships and boats, um, needs to be, let's say, completed. So it's not at its maximum technology readiness level. And that is also partly because there are very few of these rivers here in Italy. So to start, we actually went on the opposite of the scale-up process. We worked on scaling down our system because the vast majority of rivers in the world are not used for navigation. So we worked on optimizing our solution to fit the needs of those rivers that were not crossed by boats, and that's where we started, where we devised the overhead structure, for example, which is the newest version of the river cleaning system, which not only allows to, for example, lift the system in and out of the water to do extraordinary maintenance, but also to generate electricity from the spinning of these modules.
Oh,
So
interesting. So you've turned it not only into capturing but also producing electricity?
yeah, the idea is to have to make the system self-sustainable in every condition, so we do not need to rely on any kind of additional power source. Even when we have, for example, automation array, which lifts the system in and out of the water, we're able to self-sustain this with the energy produced from the barrier itself.
Wow, interesting. That's interesting. One thing I want to get into is what does the installation process look like, and maybe even further back, like how do you actually get one of these projects approved? I'm assuming if you're working at smaller rivers, it's maybe local townships, perhaps the local, or perhaps the state. Um, Walk us through the process of getting one of these projects actually approved, if you've already done it so far, and just kind of some examples there.
Yeah, the approval process sometimes depends on, let's say, how big the river is, because bigger rivers are usually under the control of several or nationwide authorities, while, for example, smaller rivers or tributaries or channelized waterways inside of urban areas are usually under the direct control of the local water remediation authorities and local municipalities. So, assuming, for example, we're going through a small to medium river, we usually first approach the water remediation authority, not only for practical reasons, because they're the ones that actually give the final permission to operate in the water, but also because they usually have data on the situation of the different rivers in the area. So, for example, they know um, what's the usual water discharged, historical events related to floods, related to extreme phenomenons, um, also data regarding particularly polluted areas that they note as problems. So once we get in touch with them, it usually starts a first phase of, let's say, project drafting. So we explain to them how the system works. If we have data at hand, that's best because we can set up a compelling case study for them, showing them, for example, look, you have this area which is under your control that is heavily polluted. If, for example, we place a system there for you, that's how much material you're going to get out of the water, and here's your benefits.
Hey there, thanks for listening to this episode. If you made it this far, it's likely that you're enjoying the show, so I wanted to ask your help. If you're enjoying it, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts and share with somebody in the same industry who might find this interesting. And if you're interested in getting summaries of these episodes, go subscribe to our newsletter that comes out on LinkedIn and Substack. Links can be found in the description. Thanks for your help in growing the reach of this show.
So it's much more compelling to them if they can feel they have a practical advantage from the deployment of this technology. Once they are, let's say, convinced of the benefits, we usually get to a technical designing drafting phase. So we, based on the location we have selected, we design the actual system. Then we discuss the, let's say, risk management part of the installation. And then we go into production. So we have a network, let's say, of trusted manufacturers for these river cleaning systems. And once it's done, which can be made in a relatively short time, we go on the spot and we do the installation ourselves. Then we set up an agreement with a third. Sometimes it's a third party, sometimes it's the remediation authority, to collect the litter, which gets retained by the system itself. This sometimes is one of the key challenges, but I think I'll leave this for a separate question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so okay, that's quite interesting. I want to talk about maybe one real quick question is on the installation. How long does it usually take for the install once you have the modules?
It's quite short, so it's about half a day at worst. That's because we personally design every piece of the barrier to be assembled on the spot with simple tools. And this process we have refined over time also comes from the previous experience of the company in the car industry, because we need to make sure everything was simple to do for the final customer.
Okay, got it. And could you tell us more? I want to dive into how are these projects financed? So is this kind of a philanthropic effort that has to be undergone? Are there budgets allocated usually in the municipalities for the prevention of pollution? How does this work? Are there any? I'm just really interested to understand maybe creative financing models, or I don't know if there's any particular things regarding nature-based solutions that could come into play here. But could you talk to us about the financing as a whole?
Yeah. So well, first, starting from the cost side of it, which sometimes is part of the challenges. Compared to, if we compare the river cleaning technology with like simple floating booms, it does come with a premium price because it can cost up to 2.5 thousand euros per linear meter, which is quite expensive compared to simple booms. But the thing is, there are no hidden costs for customers. like frequent repairings to do or damages to the area in case of floods. So we know that this is a recent market, the river cleanup market. So sometimes it's difficult to get public authorities to fund such interventions out of the blue. They have budgets allocated, but there's also a question of timings. For example, if we approach one municipality, let's say in at the middle of the year, sometimes they say, look, I have already allocated all the budget for the year, so it's going to be the next year, right? Sometimes it's even longer than that. So that's why we also offer a sponsorship model for private companies. We invest in environmental social governance objectives, and we set up a leasing model to avoid upfront cost for customers. So instead of, let's say, buying upfront one of the river cleaning systems, which may not be in their interest, they can just lease it and they pay a monthly fee to maintain one of these, and in exchange, on top of having, of course, listed this investment in ESG investment, they can also get branded on the system, so they have like territory promotion benefits and plastic credits generation for compensation purposes. Not all companies, of course, are interested in this, but it's part of the value we can generate for customers. So once the project is in place, it can be financed through these compensation measures like plastic credits, because sometimes it takes up to 1 year to validate it and get basically awarded by the third-party plastic credits generation authority. So once they have recorded the project as enabling for these plastic credits, according to how much plastic you retrieve, you can also you can produce such credits and you can sell them to companies. And that's a way for the we're tapping in the realm of project finance, but we can, of course, make the installation more profitable through this means. And
So
yeah.
So I want to. I'm not familiar with this. You said plastic credits. Is this something specifically in the EU that, because I don't believe we have this in the US. Could you talk a little bit more about this? Is it very similar to a carbon credit, basically prevention of something? You can then get it certified and sell it.
It is similar to carbon credits, and it's also a compensation measure that is not only related to the EU, but also applies to USA, for example. It has worldwide standards, which are called Verra standards, and usually differently from carbon credits, which are created on the base, for example, for what concerns litter. Carbon credits can be produced based on how much material is recycled. So sometimes that's not convenient for companies because it's only a very small percentage of the material that actually gets properly recycled. Now, differently from that, plastic credits simply generate on the basis on the sheer amount of plastic you get out of the water. So it's much more, let's say, direct for companies who want to have a chance to, let's say, extend their responsibility towards the environment out of their scope out of their, let's say, value chain. Say, for example, a plastic packaging producer can, for example, internally invest in making packaging with less plastics, reduce the amount of energy used, I don't know, optimize the whole process to produce more pieces as with less costs. But once the plastic object is out of the manufacturers, they have no means to control how that object is used and whether it gets properly recycled or whether it gets into the environment illegally. So having plastic credits for them is a way, and investing in projects that actually pick up litter from the water is a way for them to get responsible for what they produce in, let's say, outside their normal scope of activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it, I mean, maybe this is a dumb question, but is it substantial enough what's being collected in a given area that there's essentially an offtake agreement? Because there are recyclers, obviously, that recycle these materials, I assume. And I don't know how that model works. Do they pay for that? Is there some kind of small income stream to be made from once the plastics or whatever those things are sorted and then returned to the recycling entities?
There's more than one options for that actually. Usually the very standard for the generation of plastic credits then enables you as a project or as a company which carries out a project to sell these credits, for example, like $1, 1 kilo of plastic. So there's that, let's say, revenue stream to be considered, or and the plastic needs to be the plastic you retrieve and you set it up for compensation, needs to be certified, needs to undergo through a certified project. So for example, I cannot simply get out some material and I don't know, put it into an illegal landfill just because I have retrieved it from water, but I need to certify the process of that piece of litter, every single piece of litter, until they get recycled or they get upcycled, for example, because it really also depends on the kind of material we're dealing with, which changes according to areas sometimes. Like, to give you a practical example, we made a couple of case studies. So for river cleaning installations, for example, in Europe and in Southeast Asia, in Jakarta, and the how many credits were yielded by the system were completely different, because litter in Europe was, according to the measurement, there were, let's say, a small amount of this litter that could be recycled, and so to yield positive results. In Jakarta, on top of having completely different amounts of litter, because it's like 68 million tons, like in a very small amount of time. It's most of the material could be recycled because it was like polypropylene, polyethylene, polystyrene. So given the composition of the litter, also enables you to choose some options over others. There are like also financial programs to aid this plastic collection. It's called, for example, ocean-bound plastic. This is specific for rivers also, because it's plastic certified to be retrieved in riverine environments, and as opposite as having this plastic still around the environment going into the sea. So this plastic also can get sold as a stock of material, and companies that usually make use of these stocks of plastic for example, producing other objects or for their, activities as a source of raw material, can also finance these projects through this means.
Interesting. I wanted to ask, while we're on topic of finance, are there specific measurable financial benefits to the local municipalities from, I don't know, maybe if this is not done, there tends to be another cost that they have to do all the time for cleaning up something, or who knows, repairing equipment that might be damaged because it's clogged with plastics. Are there any other positive benefits from a cost perspective, whether it's to the local municipality or maybe downstream?
Yeah, there are tangible benefits, economical benefits. It's just sometimes it's not so easy to measure them because they also vary on the basis of the location and on the
Mm-hmm.
specific type of pollution that area is familiar with. Roughly speaking, for example, uh, there are a there are remediation costs that public authorities need to shoulder every year to clean up polluted areas. So currently, they do not have the means um, to have, let's say, relevant results in this area, but they still need to do that every year. So the difference between, for example, what they've been doing up until now and the results, and what they could do with a river cleaning technology, that's an incentive for them because it makes them, save money from that perspective. And also, there are there are less measurable benefits, but nonetheless important ones related to how much plastic pollution costs on specific sectors like the tourism or the fisheries and aquaculture, or even the public health sector. Um, because globally, plastic pollution is projected to cost $3.3 trillion a year to the global economy. So that kind of breaks down into loss of revenue for example, the tourism, loss of revenue for local fisheries and aquacultures, loss of revenue for the real estate because the area gets polluted and the value goes down. So there are financial incentives to take up cleanup technologies. It's just you need to craft, let's say, the proposition based on the location and how sometimes on how the customer perceive it. Because if sometimes the let's say area or the customers you approach in the area, whether be it private companies or public administration, they do not feel they're let's say they're losing money due to plastic pollution, and if they
Yeah.
do not feel so, then it's hard.
I mean, it's difficult because when you say that's a humongous number, right? 3.3 trillion, the cost will be, did you say by what year would that's projected to be?
Yeah, per
Um,
year,
it, per, oh, per
3.3
year,
per
yeah.
year.
So if that's the cost to the world, right? They're gonna say, well, maybe that's only a very small portion for me, right? I'm willing to risk it, right? But do you know if there's any interest or potential on maybe the legislation side to try to find a way to make cities responsible for the pollution in their cities, where it's like, okay, I mean, that would just be pretty difficult, right? They have to measure it in the first place, but they could say, hey, any, cities located next to a river or, that could contribute to this, they are responsible and they have to pay X tax, right? Or whatnot to the government. for every pollution, and then there would be an incentive for them to be responsible and also to kind of rally their citizens to be responsible. Do you see anything like this potentially happening, or do you have an idea of how that could work out if it's not even kind of conceptualized yet?
It's actually already happening, fortunately. There are some at the broader level, I would say. So we're talking globally here. There's a pretty big agreement being crafted, which is called the Plastic Treaty, and the Plastic Treaty is made to legally bind participant members, so countries, to not only take up, let's say, consistent and coherent measures to tackle plastic pollution, and we're talking about real interventions, not marketing,
Yeah.
and also finance such measures. So to let's say ease the potential of municipalities and local towns to uh, get solutions that basically enable them to tackle this problem at a local level. In Italy, for example, well, let's narrow down the scope a bit. There's the new Green Deal of the European Union working in this direction, and sometimes sometimes the let's say difficult part of this is when a European level legislation then needs to be adopted into several nationwide measures. So here's there's usually a gap from how when the regulation is in place at the broad level and
Mm.
when it actually gets implemented at a very very local level. So that gap is, let's say, the current framework. So what we have now, there's it will be certainly a gradual process. So we're not going to see it happen tomorrow,
Mhm.
but some areas, for example, I'm talking about personal experience here in Italy, for example, before like a year ago, they were just wondering how should they clean themselves because there were several municipalities along the stream of a river, and basically the problem, everyone recognized the extent of plastic pollution in that area, but the thing is no one wanted to be more responsible than others and implement measures to actually take pollution from the water, because that would mean that waste processing and waste collection costs were going to be on them, and they wouldn't want to be the only ones shouldering that cost. Now that thing has changed a bit because they have suggested to implement a way to tackle these costs by adding a fee in the local waste collection system. So basically, every citizen is paying a little bit more for the waste collection, and that covers the cost for such let's say plastic pollution reduction implementations. So it's a model that can be working. It can be done locally. I think it's a good thing. We will need to have plan B options because that's not happening right from
Yeah, I mean,
night.
it seems like it's very difficult because you'd have to, in that kind of situation, especially if one of those is not, let's say, let's say it's not an obvious thing where there's 10 cities and one of those is the major contributor and the other ones are very small in terms of the pollution. In that case, you could maybe make an argument that the large one should definitely pay for it and you can do some lobbying, right? But in a small, if they're all relatively similar in size, you'd want to create maybe a coalition that says, hey, as a whole, this is affecting us all. Let's all kind of band together to do this, depending on the circumstances, because obviously people want their own area to be clean, right? So that means they're going to want to collect it upriver from them, right? Which is obviously the problem of the person before them, etc. So it is interesting to think about how they could do that. I'd be curious if there's any one entity or city or whatever that is negatively affected enough by the cost of lower real estate or whatever. If there's any one city that's negatively affected enough that they would be willing to help pay for upstream collection. I think it'd be interesting to look at potential examples there. One thing I want to ask before we get past it too much is what tends to be the biggest opposition to doing something like this?
The biggest opposition is usually related to politics, um, because especially when working with public administrations, there are always political hindrances. Now, sometimes it's like there are elections, and it's very often happens that politician will be unlikely to support project like ours because they have time constraints given by their mandates, and or for example, an opposing party would not consider a project which was initiated by the previous administration. Sometimes these things happen, and most of the time, I would say, one of the other biggest constraints is related to the size of the company. So if you're for example, we had several cases of implementation of barriers here in Italy, which were completely ineffective, but they were demanded to the same company because that company was very big and it was connected with politics. But for a small company like an SME or a startup stage project like ours, it's very difficult to have the traction and the structure to really go up against these big companies, and that's why sometimes the, let's say, most widely known solution, which is also the worst solution, gets privileged compared to more effective solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's difficult. You have to be able to compel, especially on these larger projects. Being a startup it's not the same. You don't have as much sway power as if you're a startup in software or something, right? When you can just kind of be scrappy. There's infrastructure costs and people are wanting to make sure that their investment's going well. One thing I wanted to ask about, which is how is there any way that you're able to, through these projects, when you implement one, to help the local communities visualize the impacts by, like, I don't know if you you collect the plastics and you put them in a huge container right next to the river so people can start to see, hey, this is actually how much stuff is there. Are there any ways you're able to do that?
Yes, we actually work through that model. Part of my personal work in river cleaning is actually to cluster, so to put together people and to think in an ecosystemical way. So not just to approach a customer, but also how to build an ecosystem for the locals around it, and that's pretty that works usually because even in very small projects like we've done in the center of Milan, where we deployed one of our systems, for example, we worked with local small businesses that were around the area where we deployed our system in, and we made this let's say big collector where we put all the plastic that we were getting out of the river, and that drew the attention of media. For example, we got a lot of articles, a lot of media talking about us, because that was the very first time an intervention like that was made in Milan. And also, in terms of engagement, citizen engagement, that was pretty big, because people usually tend to know that a river or a watercourse is polluted, but they cannot just visualize how much it is polluted. So doing things like that and helping them see, even in like 2 days, we got 2 full bags of waste, and seeing that with their very own eyes really, sometimes that is more compelling that talking with the water remediation authorities and discussing about technical projects. Sometimes when you have the say the traction coming from also what people tell about you, is it's a good way to get a competitive edge with local administrations, and it's also a, I would say, virtuous model to pursue in other countries like in Southeast Asia, where, for example, they do not have a formal waste management system, but they work with several associations to connect with the local business tissue. And even though there are no, let's say, recycling authorities, they can, the people make this happen and become the connection that is lacking in the territory. So that's absolutely something we encourage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's obviously this would only probably happen in some cases, but you could look at this project in 2 ways. If you're able to show people, hey, here's how much plastic's being collected, if you can demonstrate to them by putting like a huge mound of plastic or something in the town square, and then people are like, wow, this is crazy. Either it could affect people in one way where they say, well, actually, let's just be way more conscious of what we do, and maybe the level of pollution goes down, right? Which then makes the project maybe a little bit less financially viable because there's less offtake, but the goal is still achieved, right? Or you could say, maybe on the other side, people say, well, they're collecting all the plastic, so why bother, right? We don't have to be cautious of how we pollute. I don't know if that's something you guys have thought about or not, but I could see that if it was done on a massive scale and it really started to kind of change the fabric of society, that people could start looking at things differently.
Yeah, let's say the final goal, of course, is to, even if the project could have such a massive impact that people just simply stop um, throwing away their litter, and very unrealistically achieve the goal of having a clean environment, we would be absolutely fine with that. I
Yeah.
mean, it would be even achieving goals without having to commit on a global scale, which of course could work. But
Yeah.
I unfortunately I don't see that happening in the near future. And on the opposite, there are such measures like bioplastics, which are being implemented, and of course they're great, but they could also work against the, let's say, general commitment to throw away less plastic, because people tend to act more carelessly, thinking, oh, this plastic should just degrade in the environment, so I should not bother um, throwing it away. But the thing is, it degrades in according to very specific conditions like pressure, like temperature, and that's something you do not really have in the environment sometimes. So
Yeah.
you just you just end up having more plastic in the environment.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing. I mean, managing the public, I guess, activities and habits is pretty much impossible. One last thing, just to kind of close things off here. If this was done successfully, kind of implemented on pretty much every river you can think of, all the small ones, especially all the contributaries globally, what is the total positive impact that this could have?
Well, the total positive impact would be to avoid the largest share of plastic litter actually ending in the world's seas and oceans. So we're talking about at least 8 million tons plastic per year. That would be a tremendous amount uh, of of new material that could be reused or recycled, and that would substantially lower the cost of recycling material, because right now recycling material is not super convenient for companies because it costs them more than having virgin plastic, for example. That would make recycled plastic truly convenient for companies and would generate, we hope, a massive uptake in this kind of materials. And then what we think is river cleaning barriers are just the beginning. Once you have these measures in place, you need to do a continuous action in the long term to make sure your waters stay clean and unpolluted. So we think of river cleaning barriers like an enabler, like permanent research stations. So with these, technologies located in strategic points, we can really make sure that everyone does their part to keep the environment clean. And for example, we can also we could also greatly benefit the um, sector of hydroelectric plants for energy production, for example, because by catching all the litter before it goes into their turbines, we make them, uh, let's say, avoid maintenance costs, and that is a huge boost for productivity. And
Interesting.
lastly, I would say it would be um, these projects, when done locally, are a massive enabler for cooperation between public and private bodies. So they usually enable both research associations, public authorities, and private companies to collaborate and say take up concrete steps and in towards achieving a cleaner environment. This is also done thanks to organizations like Friend of the Sea, for example, kindly put us in touch, because these organizations are trusted by people, and if they can show that something really works, then people are more drawn into it and are more bound to not only take active steps but also know more about these problems and how this problem affect the world and what they can do in reality to tackle them. Because I think most of the people feel kind of powerless when faced with these pollution problems. They think there's not much I can do personally, so they should feel like they can help actually, and their help as individuals matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's difficult. I mean, as individuals, there is only so much you can do unless you're, a very powerful person with connections and you run a company or whatnot. Um, so yeah, that's good. I really appreciate you coming on. I think this is interesting, a little bit different than our typical programming, but I quite enjoyed learning about what you're doing and excited to see what you guys continue to do in the future. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks so much for the nice chat.
Yeah, absolutely.